All right, so normally nobody knows who the Chief Information Security Officer at any company is. Your job is usually in the shadows.
It's true.
Now people know, because at the end of last year, you sent out, about 1.5 billion emails to all Yahoo users to tell them
a lot of emails.
Their
I
accounts
might have
were
broken
hacked.
a record.
You think so?
I think I may have broken a record.
How many emails did you send?
It was hundreds of millions of emails. I don't know the exact number, but and these did not go to spam. So this is non-spam. People wanted to get this information. We wanted to get it to them.
Well, I assume Yahoo knows a little bit about sending emails, so it should be pretty straightforward.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Now, to give you a moment of catharsis after all of that, because I know a lot of people emailed you and tweeted at you because they weren't so happy about Yahoo at the time.
This is true.
So to give you that moment, we're going to bring up a couple of mean tweets that you wanted to read out for us aloud. So we'll give you that moment to just,
right,
let it all out.
Let's let it all out. So here's Laura Chan, and she says, still getting mild panic attack that I may have done something wrong when I get Bob Lord emails. So not in this case. Thank you, Laura. And go to the next one.
Let's do it.
Oh man, sorry for the rough day, Bob Lord. Hope you're not losing your hair over this. Thank you. Thank you.
Is that the reason?
No, this is not the reason. I lost my hair in security years ago.
It's a tough job.
It's a tough one. So next one. Bob Lord, like I said to the other Bob Lord on Twitter, you're, Y-O-U-R, dead to me. Because it's Twitter, so you say you're.
And there's plenty of other Bob Lords.
And there are other Bob Lords. One was in charge of a bunch of networks at AOL, and is now over at IBM, but there are others too. Next one. Dear Bob, why are you still employed at Yahoo, you bleeping moron?
Oh, you bleeped it out.
So yeah, so this came through LinkedIn, so it wasn't just Twitter. People found lots of creative ways to hunt me down and let them know how they felt.
The internet is a friendly place.
Very friendly, safe place.
You would know about safety. All right, let's roll this back a little bit. There was 2 breaches, and let's talk about the first one you disclosed back in September 2016. There was 500,000 accounts that were hacked. Take me back to that moment when you first heard about this.
So when I personally found out, so I would say, are you familiar with that effect that Alfred Hitchcock perfected, where things look like they're sort of telescoping out, and you can still see everything, but you sort of have this weird parallax going on. I remember feeling that when I was putting all of the different pieces together. And that's not a great feeling, as you can well imagine.
How long did it take from that moment to the moment where you send out those 500 million emails?
In the grand scheme of things, not very long. I mean, there were a number of weeks that passed where we needed to understand what was the extent of the hack and to determine what had happened to the best that we could. And so we had to work with outside forensic experts to come in and take a look at the artifacts that we had, the logs that we had, and to try to put together a complete story. And as you can well imagine, because this had happened 1.5 years, 2 years before, things had changed. We didn't have all of the evidence that we needed, all the artifacts lying around, but we did have enough that they were able to put that together. So in terms of how long it went, it seemed like years, but it was really, a couple months, weeks.
Now those hackers got into the system back in 2014. What was the reason it took you so long to just figure out they were in your? It must have been a really scary thought to know that these guys were in your system for years.
And so this is an interesting point. One of the things that I talk to people about is that these campaigns can run for an extended period of time. These aren't smash and grab attacks. These are long-term plays, and when you really start to figure that out, if you haven't done that sort of work before, it's a little startling. But the answer is that I think we were interested in understanding that too. And so what was it that happened? And so the board of directors had commissioned a study, an investigation to try to go back in time and put the pieces together. Now I'm about to recommend that you do something I normally don't recommend, which is that there is a regulatory filing that we made, And those can tend to be very dry, but in the most recent 10K that we filed, there is a section on the security breach. And I won't read it to you here, it's rather lengthy, but it does go into all of the major elements that were tied to that particular breach, and then what happened internally with the company, with the evidence that was found, how it was communicated, to the degree that that information was understood by management. And so I think there's a series of lessons learned there. And then the investigative group and the board also recommended a number of changes, and so we've been continuing to refine our internal processes to make sure that that is, all that information and those lessons are internalized into our security program.
Now I want to go back to those lessons later on, but maybe before we do that, now at this point we know a little bit more about what happened back then, because there's an indictment, people have been charged.
There is an indictment.
Three Russians and 1 Canadian have been charged. Mm-hmm. And at this point, you know how they got into the system.
We do, yeah.
How did they get into the system?
Well, so I also don't recommend that people go around reading indictments. This one is worth your time. This one spells out in a fair amount of detail what it was that the attackers had done. It also names them, and so the Department of Justice is alleging that these very specific people conducted a series of operations that included attacks against Yahoo and its infrastructure. 2 of them are FSB officers, and if you're not familiar with the term FSB, you might be familiar with its older name, which is KGB. And so these are intelligence officers working within the Russian government who, it is alleged, instructed and tasked 2 hackers, one of whom is in Canada and awaiting trial, and the other one in Russia. And so this is a remarkable story in that we had visibility up to a certain point, but obviously the FBI and other agencies had more visibility, and so they put together the indictment. I highly recommend that you read that, because it does go into detail about who did what and documents the lengths to which they went to attack the infrastructure and get access to information about our users. And it also reveals, and by the way, that's unprecedented. I'm unaware of any other case where the government has indicted Russian FSB officers. I mean, it's very unusual. You may remember the whole incident with the Chinese military hackers with those indictments. So this is really unprecedented in that sense. The other thing that's unusual, at least from the public knowledge of how these things work, that standpoint, the criminals also engaged in a series of activities that were there for their own personal gain. And you really can't make this stuff up when you read about the kinds of things that they did.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about erectile dysfunction drugs. I think that's what it comes down to. One of the hackers was able to get into Yahoo's search engine, and was able to manipulate the searches for Viagra, I assume, to go to his own online pharmacy marketing scam.
Yeah.
How were they able to get that deep into Yahoo's systems?
So again, these are long-term compromises where they worked hard to fly under the radar. They worked hard to get the access that they were specifically tasked with. But it is now clear in hindsight that these guys could have gotten actual tech jobs. They were very good. So, modifying production systems is hard when you're trained and have supervision. One would imagine that that's a difficult thing to pull off without detection, and to do that for a little bit of time. So you have to say, I stay away from the word sophisticated, because I think that word is very loaded, and I think that it comes with a lot of different connotations. But I would say that these were definitely skilled individuals, and moving back and forth between their criminal activities and the state-sponsored activities is now part of that conversation that we should be having. And it muddies the water in a way, because now it's harder for people to say, oh, this kind of person is attacking me, or this kind of person is attacking me, because now we have more evidence that there's a spectrum in place. And so I think that makes the conversation much more interesting, but it does muddy the waters a fair amount.
Let's take you didn't quite answer the last question I had there when I asked about how did they actually get into the system.
So I'm not going to
procedure.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go into the technical details, and part of that I think is it's somewhat distracting, and I think a lot of what we need to do is not be as distracted by the specifics, because there were numerous tactics that they used. One of the things that I do, and many of you will know this, but there's a specific set of steps that attackers have to go through, that they must go through in order for them to achieve their goals. And those, you've heard these terms before, but there's initial reconnaissance, and so they need to see what sort of servers might be out there. Same thing holds true for attacking individuals and their laptops. They need to see what's out there, to look for footholds. They need to have an initial intrusion, some sort of compromise. From there, they have to do a number of things. They usually have to elevate their privileges, and they have to move laterally. So whatever machine they break into is not the machine that they want 99.9% of the time. So then they have to go move from machine to machine to find the thing that they're looking for. At some point, if their goal is to acquire data, they have to exfiltrate the data. So each one of these requires, in some cases, different set of tools, different set of techniques, different ways for flying under the radar, for cleaning up when they're done. And these are constants within the industry. And so, you know, the mental models that we've been using and the diagrams that I use to talk to executives, those haven't needed to be changed, because the basics of how the attacks work, those continue to be the attacks.
Now, right after you made those attacks public, you said this was a state-sponsored attack.
Right.
At the time, people laughed a little bit because they thought you were just saying that to divert the blame onto another country, maybe. How did you know at the time that it was state-sponsored?
So, and I did go public, and I did say that it was state-sponsored, and I definitely, I understand people's skepticism, because a lot of people do use the term in a wide range of ways. We have the benefit of having a group within my organization, which is called the Paranoids. We have a group that really specializes in tracking APT attackers against our users. And so we actually had world-class experts who knew what sort of things to look for and how to chase down leads to try to figure out who was behind these kinds of attacks.
Were they paranoid enough?
I think if you ask other people around the company, they will tell you that the paranoids earn their reputation every day. But hopefully we're strategic and we're good partners, and not just paranoid delusionals. So we had the luxury of tapping those people to show them the evidence that other teams within incident response were coming up with, and that information took a little bit of time to digest, but we came up with some fairly solid conclusions reasonably quickly. But we also wanted to make sure that that was not just our own internal bias, and so we also worked with outside consultants to take a look at the data and do their own independent investigation. And so we had multiple views onto that. Of course, when we worked with the FBI, they have their own sources and methods to take a look at the data, and obviously they were able to extend far beyond what we were able to do and really figure out who these specific individuals were and then name them in the indictment.
Well, the FBI had screenshots of their computers. They went pretty deep.
How about that?
Yeah, interesting, right?
So how about that? It's kind of a curious thing.
Well, we know so much now about the 2014 attack.
Mm-hmm.
That, at the time, it was the largest hack in history, I think. Then just a few months later, we got a bigger one. 1 billion accounts disclosed in December.
Indeed.
What was your reaction when you heard about that one?
Yeah, you know, one would imagine that that people were rather battle weary at that point. I mean, these things commanded the attention of the senior-most members of the company and the board. Everyone took this very seriously. The CEO was intimately involved throughout the entire process. So seeing one that was larger, you know, was of course very, very tough on everybody. But the facts were the facts, and we knew what was happening. We saw the evidence, we have, on a regular basis, acquired information that looks to be like dumps. And all the major companies do this. They look for information that might be an indication that users are at risk.
And dumps are leaks,
like
basically,
password
on
dumps
sale.
and you know, things that are traded in various places. And so, and you'll see tweets every now and then that says, hey, here's a dump of something or another. And so we have people who go look at that. And in most cases, they are at best recycled from other dumps or stolen from keyloggers or something else. But this was very different. And so, you know, we just we were geared up and we just did the right thing and jumped right in and started the process all over again.
We don't know that much about that hack, though. We don't know who was responsible. At least you haven't said it. What do you know about it?
So we know very little, and to date, you know, we've turned over as many rocks as we could possibly find in furtherance of that investigation. But to date, we've not been able to find the source of that intrusion to understand how it happened, to understand who it was. It is likely distinct from the 2014 attack, but again, there's not enough information and not enough evidence for us to really say anything more at this point.
Why was there so much more evidence for the 2014 hack than the one the year before?
So part of it has to do with log and other information that is required. One of the things that you'll hear security people say on a regular basis is that you really have to find ways to keep logs for a much longer period of time than you would normally do. And in fact, if the average time between intrusion and detection is 6 months, depending on who you listen to, you're going to need to double that in order to account for other factors and for investigations. Going back to 2013, there really just were not artifacts around for us to examine.
So it's likely we'll never know?
Potentially. I mean, you know, the attackers know what they did, and so it's possible that through other mechanisms that will become known, but at this point we just don't know.
What was Yahoo's security culture actually like back then in 2013-14? You weren't there yet, just to be fair, you came
I was
in 2015, but what allowed this to happen?
So I'll tell you what I found when I took the job, and part of the reason that I wanted to take the job was there was an APT group. Predecessors had set that up, and there was a red team. So for those of you not familiar, this is a real red team. So this is a team that uses all the same tactics and tools of real attackers to attempt to penetrate our infrastructure. And if you've seen my blog posts in the past on this, you'll know that I contend that the red team always wins. Always wins. And it's important for us to understand how attacks actually happen so that we can build up inoculations. And so otherwise, I think a lot of companies engage in routine best practices, but they don't test themselves. It's sort of like practicing martial arts in front of a mirror instead of in a ring. And so we get into the ring every day and we do things. So that was important. We had the bug bounty program. So for me, the culture was vibrant, and that was actually one of the interview questions I asked people. You know, what is it that makes the Paranoid successful? And so I got a lot of different answers, but that's been something I've been trying to build on, not just since the breach, but to take that deep partnership that the Paranoids had with the rest of the company and build on that to make that stronger. Obviously, now there's a whole other level of integration that we have to do based on this new knowledge, because you know the last thing I'm going to do is say we didn't change anything in light of the breaches. We're accelerating a number of things, but culture is part of that. I mean, I'm up in front of the company all hands every single week trying to be entertaining about security. It sometimes succeeds. I won't say it always succeeds.
It's such a fun topic.
It's a fun topic. Everybody just can't wait to hear the CISO give his readout every week. But they do tolerate it.
But there were a couple of reports that basically alleged that the security team at Yahoo did not get quite the resources maybe it should have gotten from Marissa Meyer.
I read one of those. And so I can say that was never my experience. From the very first day when I started saying I need things that are different than what we have today, I got the resources. I had to, you always have to work for it. The other thing is, I'm unaware of any CISO who says, oh, I have everything all the time. That just doesn't happen. And so for me, that contention just did not resonate with what I knew the culture to be. So I can't speak about things that happened before me. I mean, we can take a look at the number of dollars invested or the head counts or any number of the other things, but for me, when I made a case, I based it on fact and I was able to get what I needed.
Does it generally not happen because it's not a priority for the leadership?
So in the industry in general, I think we have a real disconnect between security practitioners and the executives. And I think a lot of what we do is we try to dumb things down for them. I think that works against us. And we don't try to teach them how the attacker lifecycle works. And that means you engage in these transactional relationships where they say, what do you need? And you say, I need some money for a new SIM, or I need 3 new headcount. And they say, fine, here you go. Now it's your problem again. But you talked about culture, and that's actually the thing that matters more than the dollars. What matters is how the business thinks about security from a strategic standpoint, and how people are engaged in their daily activities. So if you think the security team can go off in a corner and secure everything, you're wrong. It has to be a company-wide initiative across all the different layers to be able to be effective. So I think that's where one of those major disconnects happens in the industry, and I think that's what you see in the results with breaches today.
The culture comes from the top, though. What was Marissa Mayer's leadership like during that period?
Culture, so sure, you can say culture starts at the top, but culture is a dynamic, living thing, and so one person isn't responsible for all of culture. They set the tone. And again, my experience has been that the CEO has been at the forefront of this investigation. As soon as we rang the bell, people jumped in, starting with her, and did the right thing. And when I take a look at the hiring that we've been able to do, even when we were trying to grow the team dramatically, we've gotten the support that we've needed.
When you went to, all of this happened right in the middle of the Yahoo acquisition of, welcome to the family, but all this happened all in the middle. Yahoo paid a price. We can put a price on it now, 350 million, I think was the discount.
I believe that is right.
What was it like going to Yahoo with this, to Verizon with this, sorry?
So security professionals are rarely surprised by this kind of thing. And I think we've all, if you've been in this business for more than a few years, you've had your skirmishes. And so I think the question was always really, can you get enough of a root cause analysis to remediate? Can you demonstrate that there are improvements in place and that the attackers are out of the network? These are the most basic kinds of questions. And so I was very impressed with the Verizon leadership and with AOL leadership in how they were very focused on this, but also very knowledgeable, and it wasn't an emotional thing. These were really, we have common enemies. All the major companies have common enemies and adversaries, and so that's basically how that went.
Are you sure there's no hackers in your systems right now?
So you're asking me to prove a negative. So it's hard to prove a negative.
Percentage.
So what you can do, though, is you can build up a preponderance of circumstantial evidence. And so I mentioned the bug bounty program, I mentioned the red team, and all the other things that we're doing internally to provide signals that that the attacks would not be possible today, and the attacks that took place then are simply not possible. Again, going back to the attacker lifecycle, we took a look at each one of those steps, and the programs that we have in place are meant to reduce the chances that somebody can exploit those. And certainly the specific techniques are technically not possible today. So you can't prove a negative, but you can build up a preponderance of circumstantial evidence to have a very good story.
All right. Well, I hope you keep us safe at AOL once you join us.
We're working on it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.